Unbroken, healing through storytelling.
Through a painful yet empowering journey of discovery, Simon has transformed from terrified teenager to UK award-winning speaker and communications coach. He now employs his communication skills as a middle leader in secondary education and works under his self-built brand, Simon Speaks, to coach others seeking to lose their fear, find their voice, and speak with greater power. So welcome, Simon, to the show. How lovely to have you on. How are you doing?
Given the circumstances and given all that we're going through, I think I can say that I've got a lot less to complain about than many. So given the things that the world's going through, I can have to count my blessings and smile, because
we're currently recording this in February, so hopefully when this is published, we'll be around August time. Things may look a little bit different. We might have all been vaccinated and numbers will be going down. But the first question that I ask all of my guests is, what does the word unbroken mean to you?
I think it's a wonderful question, and I'm coming back just on the process of having read your book, which is a remarkable story. And I think being unbroken means that you sometimes go through experiences in life, sometimes as a consequence of your own choices, sometimes as the choices of other people, and sometimes simply as the fact that we're here in the world alive and something happens to us that's completely beyond our control. But regardless of where those experiences come from, I think it's about surviving them first, but then secondly, allowing them to have some kind of meaning. I remember my grandfather used to say to me that when something bad happens to you in life, you can ask one of two questions, which is, why me? Or what can I learn? And it's about migrating from asking the first question, which we all do, to the second question. And once we've learned how to ask that second question and find the meaning in the adversity, I think it's at that point that we find the strength and the resilience to become unbroken and remain unbroken, and then use those experiences to teach other people who inevitably will have also gone through some suffering, and we might be able to use the experiences we've had to help them.
So it's a massive ripple effect then, is what you're saying. The healed people heal people. Yeah, I like that. So we know that you used to have issues with speaking. Now you don't, that you are a communications coach. And I love that you're about finding your voice, because that's really what I believe I help people do, you know, to find their voice as well, because we do hold ourselves back. But can you tell me what life was like growing up? How bad was it, your ability to speak?
I remember one of my first experiences, I will have been about 14, and I went to a business trade conference in Glasgow with my father, who was a small insurance brokerage. He owned his own small business. And I remember going around that conference with him and the trade fair and going to all the different stalls. And I remember my dad trying to engage people in conversation, talking to them. And the overriding emotion I remember experiencing was that I could see how much my dad struggled to talk to people. But I knew that he was a father of 3 children, of whom I was the youngest, and he obviously had my mother as well. And I could see and sense that he really found it difficult, but he recognized that as a provider to us as children and to his wife, that he needed to put that to one side. He also volunteered in our local church for many years and spoke publicly quite often, but I could always see that he struggled. I could always see he found it difficult. And when I was 16, I had to give an assembly on my own in front of my year 11 peer group, because nobody else wanted to volunteer, and we had to do it. So I ended up stood at the front of 300 kids plus staff on my own. And it was a horrible experience. I mean, mentally, emotionally. I remember it affecting my sleep pattern, my appetite. And I just thought it was nerves. I just thought it'll get better as I get older. I'll find my confidence. And unfortunately, it got worse. And I ended up quitting a job because I was so terrified of speaking on the phone. And then they asked me to. So I quit my job. I was newly married at the time to a woman who was just as much an introvert as I was. And I got to a point in my life when I recognized that everything was in jeopardy, or would have been in jeopardy, had I not done something about it. So I had a wife who depended on me, who was wonderful with me, supported me. but I recognized that this fear of speaking to people was going to cost me everything if I didn't do something about it.
And do you think it was shyness, or was it just the fear of speaking?
I think partly what I'd seen with my dad unnerved me a little bit, because I knew that speaking in front of people was anxiety inducing, and I had a couple of negative experiences about it myself. And then I think it all came to a head when my son was born in 2016, because I walked into the hospital with my wife, and there were moments during that experience where I was mentally preparing myself to walk out with no wife and no child, because when he was born, there were some quite significant complications, and my wife was minutes away from bleeding to death. And that, well, I say broke me, pretty much did. And I still live with some of the effects of that in terms of nightmares and flashbacks, and I now find that I tend to get more frustrated with my son more quickly than I do with my daughter, who was a much easier birth. So I recognize I'm still living with some of the impacts of that. But I went through that experience without talking to anyone, and it was probably about 6 to 12 months later when I just recognized that I was done. I couldn't bond with my son very well. I was really depressed, and didn't realize until later, but I was going through postnatal depression. And luckily, one of my friends spotted me, and he said, "You need to talk to someone." He said, "You need to go and talk to somebody." And he said, "Trust me when I tell you, it might be too late if you don't." So I took that advice, and I went and found a very carefully chosen counsellor in Leeds, and worked with her for around 6 to 9 months. And that was my first time really talking to somebody, and really opening up, and really going through every minute detail of how I felt and what I'd experienced.
And that's quite a difficult thing to do when you don't like speaking about yourself. I am a psychotherapist as well, but I've sat in both chairs many times. But yeah, that's a difficult thing to do, to open up with a stranger in a room that you don't know anything about, and you're sharing all this stuff that no one else knows.
And it was something I felt I couldn't talk to my wife about at the time, because she'd been unconscious through the whole thing. I mean, I lost her for about 2 days. And, those first 2 days of having a child, but not having that moment of being able to share it with your own partner because they were unconscious. For a long time, I wouldn't say I resented my wife at all. If anything, I blamed my son more. Obviously, it wasn't his fault either, but I had needed to attach that blame to something. And I never talked to my wife about it for quite a long time, because I didn't feel she'd been there. I couldn't tell her what I'd gone through, because she hadn't witnessed it. So I found somebody objective, and I found that slightly more of an easy process, because there was nothing attached to the other end of the conversation. And after those 9 months, I started to recover, started to rebuild, and now have recognized that there are so many people in the world who are going through things, who might struggle to talk to people or to voice what it is that they've experienced and how it's affected them. And so I as a communications coach, I mean, I will acknowledge I'm not mental health trained. I'm not a counselor or a psychotherapist like you say. But I do try to help people find words for their stories and find words for their messages. And I find great joy in that, because it's then people getting up on a stage, giving a presentation or a talk, and saying, well, that wasn't actually as bad as I thought it would be. And that's where I find my joy.
Fear is a real disabler, isn't it? Because often when we do it, it's like, yeah, it wasn't as bad as I thought. So it's the pre-fear, isn't it? What we tell ourselves and what we end up believing is really what holds us back. So I'm just trying to understand, was it a shyness? Was it a social anxiety? Did you struggle to speak to people on an everyday basis?
I remember when I was younger, growing up in a church environment. I did used to go to church, and occasionally I was asked to speak to the congregation. And I was very nervous, because I think I was a shy child, but I managed to do it because it was a safe environment. I was familiar with those people. I would see them every week, and had a level of trust with them. So I think in the right environment, where there was enough scaffolding and enough support in place, I could could just about get through. But I remember growing up having big family gatherings and going to parties or whatever it was I was doing, and always being really scared to talk to people. So I think it was largely social anxiety that I think, depending on the variables or the environment, was worse at different times.
And then again, it's all then about those messages, what we tell ourselves. I've worked with a lot of clients that have had social anxiety. What will I say to them? What will I do? And then you're just so busy thinking about what to speak that it doesn't come out naturally. Then you just block yourself and jam yourself up even more. So it's really hard. So how did you break through this?
It was 2015, so it was just before my son was born, which is kind of almost laughable now that I think about it, because I was just starting to build my speaking confidence when the issue with my son's birth and everything unfolded. But I remember sitting in our first house when we were first married, a little bungalow, semi-detached bungalow in Leeds, and it was just one night where I was feeling so low, because I recognized that there was a responsibility upon me to provide for my family and to support them and to be a role model for my children, and I was just wrestling with all these inadequacies that I had. And I remember that my wife just sat with me, and I remember one thing that she said to me was that, I know it's hard and I know you struggle, but I chose you and I support you, and you will work through it, because I know enough about you to know that you're stubborn and you'll keep going at it. And I just remember that giving me the little kick I needed to start.
That's a beautiful message, isn't it? Because it's so full of love and support for you, and real belief in you that you've got this.
She's tremendous, and she is the reason I do a lot of what I do, because she's always had my back through that. And I started to look for ways to start to build, and I remember watching YouTube videos and reading books, and quite a few of the articles that I read mentioned Toastmasters, so I joined. And at first didn't want to get up and speak, was very worried to do so, but I remember watching good speakers, and then I remember watching them talk about how they'd struggled too, and I thought, well, if they've struggled and come through it, then maybe I can. And it started small and it started gradually, but I remember getting up and speaking, and again it was a safe space with people I was becoming more familiar with, and gradually became more confident and started to enter some of the competitions that they were hosting, and remember doing all right and thinking, well, if I can start to beat my fear and get this far, then how far can I go? So I entered their UK final in 2019 and won remarkably. And then you saw me speak at the professional speaking.
I had the pleasure of seeing you speak, yeah. Very confident, very, I don't want to use the word slick, that doesn't sound right, but yeah, really beautiful performance. It was, we should tell people, it's at the Professional Speaking Association. So you belong to 2 speaking associations, and they have a thing called the speaker factor, where you can only speak for 5 minutes, which people might think is easy, but actually to get your point across in 5 minutes and make an impact, and you're speaking to speakers, come on, it's not the easiest of audiences, it's very nerve-wracking. You did an amazing job, you really did.
I appreciate that. That's very kind, and it was for me the crowning milestone, because, like you say, to get to a point where you're speaking in front of 250 of your, I won't even say peers, I'll say aspiring, of people I want to be like, was a great honor and a privilege for me. But it was a real milestone of me building my courage and my confidence, and having found the words to tell my own story. I now recognize I wanted to help people find the words to tell theirs, and that's really where the business was born, really. So for about the last 18 months, I've been working on it and building it gradually, and I'm now working with a few people that I just find so rewarding, so fulfilling. Because
they do say, don't they, you know, one of the most stressful things for people is public speaking. So I know your fear is not alone. You know, people know that I'm a speaker as well. They say, oh, I could never get on the stage and speak to people. I don't know how you do it. Oh, that would make me so scared. And why is it that people are so worried? Is it the fear of judgment, do you think?
I use an acronym called FEAR, and it's 4 main reasons that I've managed to pin down. So the F is for failure, because we hate getting things wrong.
Yes.
Right from the time in school where you put your hand up and the teacher said that's the wrong answer, and it
yes.
knocks your confidence. And so failure is one. the E I find is for expectation, and this is my biggest one that I've always struggled with, which is you hyper exaggerate and you say, oh, this is going to be X, Y, Z, and they're going to think this, and I think it's going to look like this. And we set these super tense exaggerations, and quite often when people say it wasn't as bad as I thought, I always say to them, well, how bad did you think it was going to be? So there's expectations, and then the A is for adequacy, so comparison. We'll always look at other people,
Yes.
and social media is a
Comparison is the thief of joy, they say, don't they? It's really bad when we get compare-itis, because we can't compare. We really need to learn to be okay with who we are.
Yeah, and so often we find ourselves comparing ourselves to people who are so different to us in terms of their life experience or the opportunities they might have had to develop where we haven't, and we're so unfair to ourselves. And then the R, as you say, is ridicule, so judgment and being people criticizing us. But again, it's one of those things where I've never seen somebody stand on a stage and struggle and not felt anything but respect.
Yes.
Because they're being vulnerable, they're being courageous, and as much as they struggle and they think people are judging them, 99% of the time it's just not the case. We have nothing but admiration for what people are prepared to do when they put themselves in that position. So those are the reasons we feel fear, and a lot of the coaching work I do is around removing those negative barriers.
I think you're right. Fear is really imagination, isn't it? It's what we think it's going to be. And I look at fear in a different way. So I look at it as, I used to do false evidence appearing real, but now I think about it as face everything and rise. So now I use it, as a way to fuel me and to actually think, oh no, I'm going to beat this. This is not going to get the better of me. But that, as you said in your talk, it takes courage, really, doesn't it? Put yourself on a stage in front of 250 fellow speakers.
Yeah, and it's courage on so many levels. That first of all, the courage to stand in your own shoes, to acknowledge your own truth and be in your own skin, and the courage to tell your story without apology. You might be describing things that have happened to you that might challenge people, might make them feel a little bit uncomfortable, but that's your story to tell. And it's also the courage to believe that you're worthy of being heard. And I think that's a real challenge for a lot of people, is that my mother-in-law is a psychotherapist, and one of the things that she was saying to me the other week, when she's just written the text of a children's story, which I thought was beautiful when I read it, and one of the things she said really hurt me, and she said, sometimes I feel like an idea is of less value because it comes from me.
Oh.
And that's a real statement that I just think people will often have about themselves, but it's so damaging to believe that way, and so many of us do. And just because an idea or a thought comes from us, who's to say that makes it any less valuable?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why I now do a lot of what I do, is to help correct things like that.
So I need to ask the question, were your legs shaking when you stood on the stage at the PSA as they were when you were 14 in your school talk? Or did you feel okay when you stood on the stage? Was your heart thumping?
My heart was definitely thumping, mouth was a little bit dry. And one of the habits that I had up until fairly close to that point was sometimes I would swallow mid-sentence involuntarily, so my words would cut back. And I was very pleased with myself when I managed to get through the semi-final and the final without that happening. But one of my nervous habits now still is that sometimes I can get mid-sentence and have to pause because my throat tightens up. But we're getting there.
As an audience member, none of that was obvious. I have to say, you look very confident on the stage. So it's good though, isn't it? Because Louise Hay says, feel the fear and do it anyway. So that's what you're proving. And every time I think we face our fear, then we diminish its power over us, really, don't we? It evaporates a bit more.
Yeah, there's a quote that talks about we are what we repeatedly do, and excellence, but I substitute it for confidence. Confidence is therefore not an act, but a habit. So you first have to exercise courage, and as you exercise courage and you build up a bank of experiences that you can draw on, you can then have confidence, because you can say, well, I've done this many times before, and I'm still here, and it's gone okay. So I can then use that experience to either do the experience again or up the stakes a little bit. Mm-hmm. And I always say to people, you can't jump any higher if you don't raise the bar. But what you've got to do first is set the bar at a level you know you can physically do. So you jump over that bar and you think, right, if I do that a few times, well, then let's up the bar a bit and see where else we can go. And that's very much my experience is starting out with a very low bar and then saying, okay, well, let's knock it up and knock it up and knock it up until you're achieving heights you didn't think you could reach.
It's a little bit like exposure therapy, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
Getting used to the
Yeah.
situation. Yes. So I know that you are a speaker coach, but you're also a podcast host as well, aren't you? You have your own show. What is your show called?
So it's the Simon Speaks podcast, and it started out with just me sharing things that I'd picked up along my speaking journey to help people who are perhaps a little bit less confident. But then we went into lockdown, and one of my friends said to me, look, I'd love to be on a podcast. You're doing a podcast. Why don't we do an interview? So I said, oh, okay, let's do that. So we had an interview and I loved it. And I thought, oh, this could be something really beneficial for people who need to talk about their message, their story, beneficial for me because I get to have some really uplifting conversations, and obviously beneficial for anybody who listens. So I started interviewing people and I haven't stopped since. And I absolutely love it. And I don't hesitate to say that it's benefited me immensely through this lockdown period by being able to listen to such inspiring stories and get people's messages. And my sister said to me when I started the podcast, the first few might be terrible, but if you stick through the first few, you'll build something pretty good. And that was really good because she knew enough about me to moderate my expectations and say, stop being a perfectionist, just start and see how it goes. And it's turned into more of a self-help and motivation podcast for people benefiting from the stories of others. But I absolutely love where it's going, and it's just something that I really enjoy.
And were there nerves when you first started doing it, when you first had to interview people?
Massively. Even when I first started recording on my own, I used to listen back to it and think, oh, that's my voice, it's awful. And I think the first 2 or 3 takes I just deleted because I didn't want to release them. But finally getting the courage to release a few, yeah, it was fun. And then, like you say, the interviews were challenging because you're sat with a guest and you've got to ask the right questions and you have to pick up on things that they say. And it was challenging at first because I'm not used to interviewing, but I've thoroughly enjoyed it. And like I say, so many great stories have come out and it's just been so uplifting to hear them. And it's something that I never thought I would have done 3 or 4 years ago. If you'd have said to me, oh, someday you'll run a podcast, I'd have thought, no. But it's just one of those other experiences where the opportunity arose and I thought, I don't know how to do it, but I'm going to learn. And that's just another thing I've been able to conquer.
And it's also another way to work your own fears as well, isn't it? To get more comfortable with it.
Absolutely, yeah. And I'm very much of a mindset now that every conversation I have is another statement to my fear to say, I'm doing this. Yes. You're not going to hold me back. And I wouldn't say those voices have gone away, but I would say that now the experience and the feedback and the choices that I now feel empowered to make can say back to that voice in a louder voice, no, this is who I am now. And I love that because now I've got the tools to manage it and to deal with it better. So yeah, if you step on a new stage,
the voices sound like the voice of doubt, and now that confidence is building. So confidence is always going to win over doubt, isn't it?
Yeah, and I feel like now that's where I am. And if you stuck me on a new stage in front of a new audience with new variables, the old anxiety would probably return because they'd say, well, you haven't done this before. But I would still be able to say, yeah, but I've done X, Y, and Z, and that gives me enough to enter this situation and do my best with it. Mm-hmm. And if, you know what, we help one person in that audience do something different with their life, then that's a victory for me.
What tips would you give to someone that has, they may be planning to do some speaking somewhere and they're really, really nervous? What kind of things do you tell people that help them to deliver their talk when they speak publicly?
It's a great question. I think one of the things that we can often overlook is the simplicity of some of the tools that we can employ. And I think sometimes because they are so simple, we choose to ignore them. Breathing is one of the key things for me. And, you know, people will say, well, yeah, I know how to breathe. I've done it all my life. But being able to breathe with a focus and with a purpose is something altogether different. When we breathe generally, it's very shallow. We don't take in a lot of air and we don't regulate it very well. We don't get oxygen. So I myself, when I'm going to present, I undertake a pattern of deep breathing, whether that's in for 5 and out for 7, or in for 4 up to maximum capacity, hold it for 4 and then release for 4. Get that control. And you're doing two things there. You're calming the nerves, but you're also expanding the diaphragm and warming up the muscles needed for effective breathing and therefore a good quality voice. So when you hear people breathing very shallowly on the stage and their voice is trembling, if they'd have warmed up their voice and their breathing beforehand, that might be something that alleviates it. And then the other common problem I tend to find is that when people get very nervous, they talk too fast.
Yes.
And as soon as you start to
get it over and done with as quickly as possible.
Yeah, the brain runs away and the mouth can't keep up, and then the pauses get filled with ums and ahs and crutch words and fillers that dilute the message. So the two top tips I work with people on straight away to improve speaking is getting that deep breathing going so that they can really feel the expansion and their voice has a better resonance and projection to it. But then also really getting down to a very comfortable, slow speed of speaking with pauses in so that people can just give themselves that extra processing time and give the audience the extra processing time as well.
Yes.
And I did those two things first when I was learning to speak. And I think those are the two things that really made a quick impact.
Well, they sound like they're also tools for grounding yourself. And if you're grounded, you can come from a much more stable place, obviously, to be able to deliver your talk and to be able to deliver it with panache. You don't want to just get over and done with. What did she say? Oh, I didn't hear. So yes, to be able to put in the pauses and to take your time, then it's more heartfelt as well, isn't it? And it's more authentic.
It's a good point you make. The voice and the message will only ever be as powerful as the platform that you build for it. And your platform is your body. And what you do with your body on the stage really does have a huge impact on the quality of your voice and therefore how your message is received. And we have so many habits and things we do with our bodies when we're nervous that can undermine how we look on the stage or how we present ourselves. And that can have a real impact. So yeah, it's all about being grounded. And rather than trying to deny that moment's happening on the stage and say, oh, I'm going into defense mode, it's about having the courage to open up and say, I'm in this moment, I'm here, I'm going to share this message and I'm going to get it out there. And then it becomes so much more of an emotional investment on your part and the audience as well.
Because we're really like mirrors, as an audience member. If someone's really nervous, we pick up on those nerves. But if someone's very vulnerable, it allows us to also feel vulnerable. I did in 2019 my first TEDx, and it was to 2,000 people, which I'd never spoken to quite so many people before. And there's a line that I always get to that I always feel like I'm going to cry. They said, it's fine if you cry. So you just want me to cry so that the audience cries as well? They said, yeah, it's really good for them. So I just had to be okay that this line might upset me, and that's all right. And everybody then says to me, oh, that bit when you nearly lost it, that's when I lost it as well. So it's really interesting how we mirror each other, that we can go at someone's pace if they're being authentic, and we pick up on the nerves as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we're able to demonstrate that level of control over our message and still have the emotional connection to it, then people are going to feel confidence in us as we speak, but then also connect in the right moments. And that, I have to say, is what comes across in your TEDx that I watched, because it was incredibly powerful, and really did hit home to me. So wonderful example of how to do it. Thank you.
Well, it took a lot of coaching and a lot of grounding before. I was waiting on the wings. My coach was also the presenter with Fred McCauley, and to write 3 great big deep breaths just before you go out on the stage. So there you go. It's a well-known thing, and I use breath even if we're not doing public speaking. If we just feel overwhelmed, especially with everything that's been going on in Corona times, it's Corona coaster, just to center ourselves and just to ground ourselves, just to land back in your body. I think really it's so important. I think what you're talking about is going to resonate with so many people, because so many people have this fear of public speaking and meeting new people and making conversation. But it's good to hear that you do sometimes still feel scared, but you still do it anyway.
You can, and there are so many things now that you can do without realizing you're doing it. So if you want to practice breathing and regulating your breathing, yoga is fantastic. I highly recommend yoga. And I'm not much of a singer, but I enjoy singing, and that does help. But I know you mentioned this in your book as well, which is running. It is something that I've done quite a lot of, and although I'm struggling to get back down to my previous times through lockdown eating and so forth, I do find running very helpful for mental freedom, but also getting into a rhythm and regulating your breathing with your steps. And that does help me a lot as well. So there are quite a number of things that you can do rather than just sitting and breathing. You can engage in other activities.
And all of those things that you spoke about are all ways to land back in your body, really, aren't they? They're all connecting in rather than, panicking and being out of our body. So it's always about coming back to yourself and grounding yourself. Oh, it's just been fascinating talking to you, Simon. It's brilliant. Thank you so much for coming on the show. If people want to find out more about you, where can they find you?
So the website is probably the central place for everything that I do. So it's simonspeaks.co.uk, and on that website you can see all of my LinkedIn social media profiles are there. You can connect with me through email. You can contact me through the website, and I'm running a number of masterclasses, other sessions that you can see through that website as well. But I'm on LinkedIn, other social media, and by email as well. But all that's done through simonspeaks.co.uk. So have a pop along and have a look at what I'm up to if you fancy.
And I will put all those links in the show notes as well. So just remains for me to say thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been lovely to speak to you.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been an honour.
You're welcome.
Unbroken, healing through storytelling.